Welcome to the recording of our Global Insights Report and the State of Culture in 2024 by the Culture Factor Group. My name is Egbert Schram and I am the Group CEO at the Culture Factor, and it's my pleasure to walk you through the report and some of the key findings and takeaways that will ideally help you to take culture into account into your daily working practices. So let's get started. What we're going to talk about in this recording is three main points. First, we're going to have a top-level helicopter view at the key findings from the report. Then we're going to deep dive in two particular topics, namely leadership and decision-making. And last, we're going to dive into a couple of strategies that will help you to leverage these insights and move forward. Before we continue, short introduction on the Culture Factor Group. As an organization, we have for the last roughly 4 decades assisted over 5,000 organizations in making the topic of culture tangible using behavioral modeling. We are sector agnostic, although there are a couple of sectors where our services tend to be used on a daily basis, namely sectors such as engineering, finance and insurance, technology and manufacturing, mainly because we approach a soft topic such as culture with a very tangible numerical approach, making decision-making more objective and faster. So let's dive into that topic of culture, and let's start with a short reflection on what actually is culture about. And as a pioneer in the studies of numerical cultural comparison has quoted Hofstede, culture is the programming of the mind. And if you relate that to what does this matter on a day-to-day work basis, there are a couple of things that stand out. If organizations do not take culture into account, there is a larger than average likelihood that they will be facing significant cross-border or even within company project delays. People will experience a lack of motivation because if you constantly get exposed to ways that are not yours without understanding why this drains energy, it will drain motivation. You will see increases in sick leave in many multicultural teams if culture is not openly discussed. And last but certainly not least, in the area of cross-cultural marketing, not taking culture into account will mean significant damages, if not significant loss of concrete business, therefore, in key markets. And I think we've all heard and seen examples where cross-cultural marketing went in the wrong direction. So these are the things if you do not take culture into account. If you do take culture into account, a lot of organizations indicate that ranging from increasing levels of EBITDA, pure profit, to increasing concrete revenues when their ways of working are aligned. So culture has a significant financial impact besides the obvious emotional impact. So let's dive into a couple of the key findings from the report. Now, to get started, as a background, this report is based on data we collect every year across the globe. We are active in over 60 countries, and our research range with organizational studies go to over 100 countries. This data that today's recording is based on comes from over 150,000 respondents, representing over 600 organizations who are active collectively in over 180 countries. So it is pretty much as global as it can get. To start with an executive summary of what comes out of that big research, 4 main points. Number 1, adapt the leadership styles that you display throughout the organization. If you want your leadership to be effective, understanding how culture influences leadership expectations and evaluations is a key component to make leadership work for you, not against your strategic initiatives. Make sure you clarify expectations towards customers towards team members, towards new hires, culture codes people to have certain expectations towards the ways of working and the day-to-day interaction they have with their colleagues and customers. Make role distribution explicit. Make responsibilities explicit, because when you do this, when there are no tensions yet, it becomes a lot easier to stay objective and rational when the occasional tension does appear. Very important, and this is not just a Nordic thing, emphasize work-life balance. The research shows that across the globe, especially the newer workforce generations, so Gen Z and millennials, people below the age of 42, expect a proactive attitude from their employers with regards to respecting their personal time and space. So this is no longer a nice to have, it is a quintessential expectation across the globe. And very importantly, similarly again towards those two generations, so Gen Z and millennial, unlike Gen X and the generation of boomers, so people older than 42 combined, the newer generations expect clear hands-on guidance with regards to their work. Prime reason being, then it's easier to also indicate when work is done, successfully executed, and then we go back to that work-life balance perspective. For a lot of managers who tend to be Gen X, this is difficult because they grew up in a time where they had to figure things out by themselves. This is no longer a potential option for many new workers. So let's dive a little bit deeper and open this discussion up. One thing we do a lot of in the office is to collaborate. And in order to collaborate, we have a lot of meetings, all of us. And it doesn't matter if we're white-collar workers, blue-collar workers, meetings have become an institutionalized behavior in work life. So we all have an opinion on collaborations and meetings, but do we really know why we have that opinion and what are the consequences of that opinion? So if we do a little exercise with this, reflect for yourself. If I were to ask you, what is the perfect meeting? Just note it down for yourself. I'll give you 4 options to help your thinking. So option number 1, the perfect meeting is a platform to exchange meaningful information in order to make a decision in the meeting. And that means that meetings have clear objectives. Everybody should be able to participate. The meetings are short and action-oriented. Perhaps this is your perfect meeting. Or your perfect meeting might be a place to give the leader a platform to ensure the group has a similar opinion. Harmony is important. And that means meetings are characterized by not being meant to take decisions. The decisions are already made. So if you want to influence that decision, you must influence before the meeting. Otherwise, you will be late. If people disagree, this will always be sidetracked into one-on-ones outside the meeting, never in the meeting. Perhaps your perfect meeting is neither one of those two, but a meeting is very clear. It's a platform for experts only to change or exchange the needed information. That means the meetings are very structured. They are procedural. The agenda has been sent in advance in order to avoid confusion and to be effective. And it also includes clear structure on how decisions are made and communicated. And obviously, there will be a 4th option. Perhaps your meeting preference is it's a platform where anybody can join in at any point in time. Doesn't matter if you're an expert or a manager or a leader or not, doesn't matter. The meeting is an open platform for anybody to contribute to. The agenda, therefore, is flexible. It's also not meant to take decisions. It's just a place to discuss. Now, you have had 4 scenarios. Which one is your perfect meeting? The likelihood is the following. If you come from an Anglo-Saxon culture, the top left style will be most likely your preferred style. If you come from a culture such as India or China, and you are the manager, it's more likely to be that top right one. If you come from a Germanic speaking region or similar cultures, the likelihood is that no, the meeting has to be structured and for experts only. And if you come from the Nordics or are Dutch, like in my case, meetings, they should be flexible. So culture very strongly influences how we have natural preferences. These might change, however, because depending on the organization you work in, one style is more likely to be prevalent than the other. So when we bring that discussion to working practices or organizational culture, there are a couple of things to keep in mind. We all have desires on how we like our work to be. We also, at least at a managerial and strategic level, have clear objectives with regards to what is the strategy and what is the culture that will help us to execute that strategy successfully. Then we all think we have an idea of what our culture is, but there we're all biased, especially HR roles. And then there are the facts and figures that we provide for over 200 organizations a year by actually assessing the actual culture in an organization, mapping that to the desired, the emotional fit, and linking it to what is necessary from a strategic perspective. This approach was used in this particular study. So let's dive in a little bit more depth. If you think about your work, what is more important, the processes or the outcome of your work? If we look at the globe, what we can see is that in the purple countries, employees want to have more goal orientation, more clarity on the priorities that they are supposed to execute. In the orange countries, it's the opposite. People want to have less goal orientation. Now, the way to let this sink in is the concept of green grass. The grass is always greener on the other side. In other words, keep in mind that if a culture indicates that they want to have a more goal-oriented way of working, it is likely because they currently do not have it. So keep that in mind when you think back about your own organization and or team. Is it that people want that what they do not have? If we zoom in a little bit, as mentioned before, Gen Z and millennials globally do tend to want to have more guidance, so more focus on the process compared to what their managers are giving them. And irrespective of the culture these millennials and Gen Zs are in, there will not be a big difference there. Interestingly, women often tend to want to have more goal orientation, and this is to all likelihood because in most countries globally, gender equality is still a marketing term, and in reality, women are expected to outperform the men at work and at home. Hence, they have a lot more workload to take care of, and hence that desire to have work life be more goal-oriented, so there is less waste of time. And that is important if you want to create more gender equality. You cannot separate work life from private life. So keep in mind, how do societies structure that support mechanism and that gender equality in real life? Think about daycare availability, think about student placement, etc. Are people actually able to use those kind of infrastructures or not? Let's look at another key finding. Who are you loyal to in your work? Is it your direct unit boss, your team leader? Is it the team, the people in the team? Is it the wider organization? Or is it none of the before? And is it just purely the profession that you profess? The way to look at this is that globally, most cultures want to have more a local culture. They want to have more feeling of bonding and belonging to their respective teams. Perhaps work life has become too task-oriented and we have lost the connection with the people that we work with. That is, however, not the case in cultures that score purple because there the likelihood is bigger that people already have a lot of that bonding. And perhaps there's too much of it, too much feeling of social pressure to fit in, hence a desire to have more professionalism in work life, and as such, develop more in that professional direction. So keep in mind that green grass concept. A color here might indicate that people get too little of that, what they want. And that is basically also what the findings indicate. As mentioned before, millennials and Gen Z want more feelings of bonding. Work life has to be a safer space because the wider society has become increasingly unpredictable. So from a peace of mind perspective, if you can really rely on your colleagues and your company, it takes at least one worry away. So keep that in mind when you think about things like belonging. A bit further breakdown. Can you be a good manager, if we talk about management, without having the precise answers to questions that your subordinates might raise? Here we've broken down some of the countries in a bit more detail. And here you can see that, for example, in a culture like the Netherlands, sure, you can be a good manager. You don't really need to know much about the content of the work. You need to know people. You need to be able who to source on which particular task or assignment. But in cultures such as Nigeria, Mexico, Poland, it's the exact opposite. As a manager, you are expected to have more expertise. You need to be content driven. Now, the reflection question there is, and not a surprise coming from a Dutch person, to which extent does the knowledge and or expertise of the manager become the bottleneck for the development of people around them? If we zoom in on a couple of example cultures, Finland, India, the Netherlands, and the US, and we dissect it across the various age segments, interesting things stand out. For example, in hierarchical cultures or cultures that are very execution and action oriented, success oriented, like also India and the USA, their managers are expected to know a little bit more because that means they can set clearer roles, accountabilities, and as such, direction, which means people can become more independent in their execution. The opposite is the case in Finland and the Netherlands because people in those cultures are not defined by work, and hence words like accountability, targets don't radiate trust or competency. They radiate distrust. They radiate a feeling that, why am I supposed to work on your targets? Why can't I just figure some things out by myself? So keep in mind that if you talk about expectations, clarifications, what is the role of a manager? Is that to set directions and goals for accountability? Or is the manager expected to simply facilitate collaboration between people? Similarly, if we think about job roles, is having a clear picture of what is requested of you stressing you out, giving you the feeling of being forced to fit in? Or is it creating peace of mind because it's clear what is expected, you do it, you're done? Here again, a couple of examples. We can see that in cultures that are highly uncertainty avoidant and in some cases also very short-term oriented, so cultures such as France, Mexico, Japan, people find it rather important to have specific instructions on what is expected of them so that there can be a clear delineation, a framework of operation that people can operate in without necessarily stressing too much about what is expected because it has been defined precisely. If we look again at our example cultures, again, what stands out is the expectations regarding, in this case, management. Is the management supposed to provide direction, provide goals, and in order to achieve those goals, provide a structure and clear definitions? Yes, in cultures such as India and the US, definitely. But in cultures like the Netherlands and Finland, where managers are more expected to provide answers to the why, not to the what or to the how, If there is too much specification of job roles, this creates stress for people because people feel they're pressured into doing something they might not want to do. You can clearly see that in cultures like Finland and the Netherlands, where that role distribution or that job description isn't really that important. It is important for the younger generations. So always keep in mind in your workforce, what is that age distribution and the generic tip that Gen Z and millennials want more guidance and more structure. So let's summarize this in terms of what then does all of this mean for you? What's next? What is the so what? A couple of things. Keep in mind that when we talk about culture and work, there is what we do at work. It's the actual way of doing things, the actual culture. There is how we feel about that way of working, the emotional connection to it. It either excites us or it stresses us out. That's national culture. There is what we would like to be doing as the desire. There is what we need to get done, the optimal culture. That's the North Star that you're aiming at. And then there is what you think you're doing. In generic terms, if you engage the topic of culture without data, you're building a sandcastle, you're busy building things on wishful thinking. And in the long run, that's not very useful. So using cultural data helps you to keep the discussion real, to avoid the la-la land discussion, and with that la-la behavior, disenfranchise your whole workforce because people will feel it when the discussion is based on wishful thinking and not on actual data. So moving forward, bring data into that culture equation. And if you want to know more about how this is done, our strong suggestion is the following. Keep in mind that if we talk about the 4 summary points that we discussed about today, that in order to keep culture real, we need to clarify roles, we need to clarify expectations, we need to ensure leadership is adaptable to different contexts, and we need to make sure that we proactively guard and respect work-life balance. Now, if you want to know more about this, do stay in touch with us, follow us through LinkedIn, through our newsletter, through upcoming panel discussions that we will be hosting throughout the coming quarters. And I hope to see you in our conference in this year, organized in Canada at the Niagara Falls on November 8th, 2024, with keynote speakers from, among others, Airbus and OnLogic, talking about how they have been proactively leveraging culture to become even better organizations. On that note, thank you for tuning into this recording and hope to see you in one of our upcoming courses, webinars, or hopefully the conference. Thank you and goodbye.